Hello, this is Bill Trurin, the Sussex County Historian, and today we're having a beautiful October 2020 visit to the Sparta Historical Society's VanKirk Museum. Come along with us.
This was a transition between when horse-drawn vehicles existed and other cars existed. So if I was driving down the road and there was a horse crossing the road, I didn't want to spook it, so what I would use is that horn. Now, if there were no horses but people, I would use that horn. Okay, it caught people's attention. Back here, we have an 1895 Sturtevant Larrabee sleigh that would have been used during the winter months. We have in the base of it a foot warmer, so that if you were out in the middle of the winter, you would put red hot coals from the fireplace in that. We even have an original blanket that would go over your legs and knees, and that would keep the heat there and keep you nice and warm and toasty. This piece is a wonderful addition as well. This is a doctor's buggy from the late 1800s. If I was a doctor back then and heard that I had to make a house call, like somebody was having a baby, what I would do, and it was winter, a foot of snow, what I would do is use a carriage jack, like this piece. I'd use the wrench there. I would take these wheels off and put the skis, we have all four skis for this particular piece, put those on, and then I could go through the snow very nicely.
Talking about that, did Sparta have any wheelwright shops or?
Oh, many.
Blacksmith shops?
There was one at up by where Dunkin' Donuts is right now. We had other ones. There were 4 or 5. And of course, you have to understand that most of the farms had their own blacksmithing capabilities. But when it comes to wheelwrights, this little wheel up here on the wall, a wheelwright would make the wooden wheel. But then all of those wooden wheels had to be covered with a piece of steel. And that wheel is calibrated to go around the outside of the wooden wheel with the spokes and measure exactly how long of a strap of steel you needed. So
there was a lot of specialty items in the 1800s, like being a wheelwright, making barrels, a cooper.
Yeah. We look at them as, perhaps not as sophisticated, but they were indeed sophisticated in their own way. A Model T is a wonderful example because they could adapt it. Here's a Model T that was adapted for the early days of Limecrest. Here's Robert Earl's first bus. That was a Model T. It was adapted for taking school children, and we didn't have Sparta High School. We had Newton High School. So they took that up to Newton High School.
That looks very similar to what D.W. Clark had as their original for Hardiston Township.
Yes. Oxen, they would strap that to them, and the oxen would pull a plow.
Okay, Jack, where are we now? Are we in the basement?
We're in the basement of the VanKirk Homestead. This has original hand-hewn beams And the exhibit we've placed here is what's cooking at the VanKirk farm from 1780 to 1920.
That's cute.
It's divided in half. So over here where the fireplace is represents 1780 to about 1850. In other words, before the Industrial Revolution. Many of the devices were made at home or by very, very small craftsmen who, including wheelwrights and blacksmiths. And although the blacksmiths, many of the farms served as their own blacksmiths. They would heat up the steel. Good example from that point of view is this piece, which is a very old toaster. They would take a slab of bread, put it in there, and put it in front of the fireplace, spin it around, and they could toast both sides. This piece also, they could take strips of meat and put it in front of the fireplace, and that would dry the meat, so they made bacon or jerky or something of that nature that was edible.
And they used to use candles?
They used a lot of candles. It's all they really had. Oil was used on occasion, kerosene, but the candles they could make right at home.
Whale oil, that's what we need.
Yeah. The candles they would make from lard, from hogs and things like that.
Now the hole in the side of the oven, that's for...
Well, the hole inside of the oven, which was quite a discovery, this fireplace had been boarded up for over 100 years. That hole was designed so that the heat from the fireplace would go up into a beehive oven on the other side of the wall here, and that would be where they would bake things, okay?
A lot of the farmhouses seemed to have those.
Yes.
Now, is this like a butter churn, these
Well,
things?
we have several different butter churns. This, there's a ceramic one over here. They evolved over time. Wooden was the most common. Ceramic was the next type of butter churn that they used.
And what is this wooden cabinet?
Well, that's an ice box, known today as a refrigerator. But these were used in the old days. They would go to most of the farms had a place that was where they could saw and cut blocks of ice. The VanKirk pond was used for that purpose, and they'd take a small block of ice. This device would pick up a block and they would put it into the ice box. A 1 foot square block would generally last most of a week, not all week. But they saved the ice in an ice house. This is a picture of the VanKirk ice house. There were 2 of them on the property. And they would store ice there with either straw or sawdust in between layers so that it didn't melt right away.
What's this contraption?
Well, this is a this is a wonderful washing machine. This was called the Boss, and you would throw your clothes in this, and you would crank it, and it would turn your clothes, and then you'd bring the clothes out and run them through a wringer like this that would partially dry the clothing. You didn't have a dryer, so you had a rope. You'd have that outside, and you'd let your clothing air dry.
On a clothesline.
Yes, and some people still love that because it gave, being in the fresh air, it gave clothes a fresher smell than, using it other ways.
Very
So,
good. And then I guess women would take clothes out, beat the rugs on the thing?
absolutely, you didn't have a washing machine big enough to handle a rug, so you would take the rug outside and you would just beat the heck out of it and get the dirt out both sides. So it was many different clever devices that they used throughout the years.
Great, very good. Thanks for the tour here. And the ice tongs, they look strong.
They are, and that pair above there is even stronger.
Okay, yeah. And what do we have over here next to here? This is cooking in the VanKirk house from 1780 until mid 1800s,
Yes,
let's say.
1850.
And then
Over here, we represent cooking at the VanKirk, or what's cooking at the VanKirk house from 1850 to 1920. In other words, after the Industrial Revolution. And one of the featured pieces is this wonderful cast iron stove. This stove came in many different models. All of the stoves of the time were cast iron from big factories, most of which were in Pennsylvania. This was a top-of-the-line stove. Most of the stoves were, watch your foot.
yeah.
Most of the stoves were just plain black. If you wanted, it's like buying a car. If you wanted the next grade model, you could get one with white enamel. If you wanted the top of the line, you could get one in this turquoise blue, and it had nickel-plated fenders for it that would remove. The pieces we have on the stove are wonderful too. This is a very old waffle maker that you could open and close and spin and so forth.
And so the waffles are cooked, just
Cooked
laying
both
on top.
sides very slowly.
Just
okay?
laying on top of the hot
And,
oven.
I've actually used one of those. My grandmother had one, and they were the best waffles I've ever eaten. So, and then irons were very popular. This was an early steam iron. That's a charcoal iron. And then the other objects represent various types of objects that were common in a home back around the turn of the century, 1900. A lot of people think that farmers were poor, but indeed farmers were not unlike our own families. In other words, they had some very good pieces, but they didn't use them every day. They would use everyday china, cheap, on a daily basis. They would bring out the fine china for things like Thanksgiving or the holidays, and in fact we have VanKirk pieces of sterling silver that are all marked with the VanKirk initials. So, and they did not use those on a day-to-day basis. They used those for special events.
Okay. So what's this room right here, Jack?
Well, we've now moved into an exhibit called Sparta Underground, Men, Mines, and Minerals. And it's about the three types of mining that occurred here in Sparta in years gone by and even presently that made Sparta what it is today. We start down here with iron, which was discovered in Sparta in 1792 by two Englishmen. Between 1889 and 1899, Thomas Edison was very involved because he bought 7 pre-existing iron mines on roughly 2,300 acres and started mining them. He was fairly successful, although most of the iron ultimately proved not to be of the quality that was discovered at a deposit in Minnesota. And so he discontinued this mining operation after spending millions of dollars. But we find it's very important to honor Mr. Edison, who lived here in Sparta for quite a while. Even had his house up at the mines. He called that house the White House, by the way. This is a time clock that was used up on Sparta Mountain, along with some of the time clock cards. We have other artifacts here. Edison later, after iron mining, got involved in mining of limestone. And his first operation, or what brought him back to Sparta, was a quarry called the Crestmore Quarry, which later became Limecrest Quarry and is now operated by Brainstone of Sparta. The model is a 1938 model of that quarry, done by Berthold Audsley, who was actually working for Edison early in his career as a patent model maker. So he had a long history here. The final area that we deal with is the Sterling Hill and Ogdensburg area. Up until 1914, Ogdensburg was a portion of Sparta, so we include this here with an ore car filled with over a ton of ore, various artifacts, including some of the major minerals found in those mines, and other objects that relate to them.
So this would be the buckets that somebody would put their dirty shoes and their dirty clothes in.
That's correct.
Raise it up over the lockers so that other people don't have to smell it.
Coming in and change going home, because the wives didn't want them all dirty when they came home. They also had showers, and of course, one of the things that people are always questioning about is our dynamite right here. But fear not, that's not really dynamite. It's wooden dowels covered with craft paper and dipped in paraffin. So
Jack, that's what they all tell me.
Yeah.
And then they hand it to me and run.
Yeah.
But I think that they'd use this drill like this down in the mines and put it against the face wall of it, and it would be run, this one with pneumatic. Air under pressure.
Yeah.
It would revolve, they would dig a hole, they'd stick the dynamite in and take it, get away, and it would blast the wall.
Yes.
One thing I wanted to cover with you is the idea that Sparta has a lot of natural resources in the form of rock.
Yes.
And limecrest is calcite that's used in lime for different purposes, chinking and in making of agricultural stuff,
like
fertilizer and things. And then what Edison had discovered, and the Ogden before him up on the hill, was the iron, and then they tried to separate the iron, and the iron, a way to separate it is that the ore up there was magnetic, so this magnet could show that taking effect.
Well, Edison reinvented his process, shall we say, up at the mine that he, this is a picture of their main mining operation up there on Edison, Sparta Mountain, in the section that was once called Edison. initially what Edison did was he crushed the ore and he separated it in this building, this tall building, by having electromagnets in there. All of that sand from the rock went to the top of the building and was filtered down past electromagnets.
So they take the rock, run it through crushers, it would come into being a powder or granular.
Sand, basically
granular.
sand, yeah.
And then they basically put a giant magnet next to it. You can't really make them that big, but they did with electromagnets. Yes. He created the power.
Yes, that's exactly right. But from there, he would take the iron sand that had been collected and he would send it on the Ogden Mine Railroad to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania for smelting. But even though it was iron, it was sand, small particles, and that was blown out the top of their smokestacks. So
it would also blow off the ore cars.
Of course. But what he did was he had to reinvent himself and develop a process called the bricking process. These are briquettes of Edison iron. Some were 2.5 inches, some 3 inches. And what he would do is he would mix the iron sand with like a paraffin, a wax, and he would press those 3 times. They had to be, the third press was at 60,000 pounds per square inch. So in essence, he was pushing it back into a rock formation. Now these, if he sent them to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, were heavy enough so that they did not come out the top of the smokestacks. He got iron and steel.
And they were, you could go up into the woods today and it could be likely that you could still find one of these intact.
Increasingly difficult, especially the word intact. You have to understand these are now well over 100 years old. They do fall apart after a while. We have been very fortunate in tapping several people with collections of these, and that's how we've gotten such perfect ones.
Whose sugar bowl is that there?
Well, that was this lady's. This is a picture of Lucretia Search and her son. Lucretia owned the boarding house up next to Edison's White House, his home up on Sparta Mountain. And in addition to owning that boarding house, she was Thomas Edison's housekeeper. And Thomas Edison gave her this wonderful silver butter dish, all engraved inside. It's silver with a gold wash, as an appreciation for what her service in keeping his house organized. Edison was not the neatest guy in the world, let's put it that way.
Slept on his desk.
But I want to go back for one thing. There are two, remember when Edison crushed all of the ore into sand, he had the sand with the iron in it, but he also had sand that didn't have any iron in it. And that sand he sold to the cement industry. In the 10 years he was operating up on Sparta Mountain, he actually made more money selling that junk sand to the cement industry than he made off of the iron. Okay?
Very good.
And that is where the Edison story continued and took a giant leap towards the creation of a better limestone in America. He wanted to develop Portland cement. So
Very good. And then you were going to segue over to other resources that Sparta has, which in the larger region, there's underground again. There's more minerals that are of humans' interest for making tools, technology, and things to make our lives easier.
yes.
And that could be found in the Sterling mine.
That's correct. And the limestone ore body that is mined today is actually very closely connected to what is mined at the Sterling mine, or was mined at the Sterling mine in Ogdensburg. We include this because until 1914, Ogdensburg was part of Sparta. So we've included some of the various ores that were found there, a typical ore car, and some fluorescent minerals that everybody worldwide loves to see.
That's great. And like this big slab here is very similar to the one that is now in the American Museum of Natural History in New York City.
Well, that's right. That's because that particular piece, they wanted a 15 by 19 foot slab in New York. The good news was that they got a huge slab. The bad news was that the top piece of the slab, roughly 3 feet high and 4 feet wide, broke off.
But that's a good news for somebody else.
Yeah, and it was the good news for us. So.
Great. Can we see somebody says that they have fluorescent properties when the light is out, that you could see in the visual spectrum colors.
Yeah. You want me to try this?
Yeah. I'll turn out my light too.
So this is the ore car and that big slab fluorescing with various minerals, some of which are very rare today because the mines have been closed for so long. And if one is experienced enough, you can actually find fluorescent minerals right here in Sparta. For instance, these two large orange boulders were pieces I broke off of a 500-pound boulder and brought down here from boulders that were brought here by glaciers some 10,000 years ago.
So they may have come from Franklin area and the glaciers pushed them south.
Correct.
Further.
Correct.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Turn this off. So Jack, we're here at Sparta Historical Society in the VanKirk Homestead Museum, and we're in the first room when we come in to the house. And what is on exhibit here? It looks really well done.
Well, this is our changing exhibition gallery. We have at least 2 exhibitions a year in here that feature items that the VanKirk family may have run into during their long existence here in Sparta. In this case, I'm sure VanKirks had met Thomas Edison and knew of the mining operation. So this is an overview of Thomas Edison's life, drawn from several resources, including our own collection, but other institutions and private collectors throughout the region.
Hey Jack, I'm just noticing right now, there's a picture of Thomas Edison behind you. You are the spitting image of that picture.
Well, how about that, you know? You don't know half of that, but yes, that's an original portrait of Mr. Edison, who, by the way, as a child was known as Al, and that's from the Charles Edison Fund in Newark, New Jersey, a very rare portrait of him. And we have objects from that fund, the Edison Center at Menlo Park down in Edison, various collectors, including some extremely rare pieces from the world's largest privately held collection of Edison material, literally thousands of objects.
So in general, we have a phonographic, well, the heart of it is a phonograph, and this is one that works like a lathe, like a spindle.
Well,
Others.
this was his earliest experiment. This was a tinfoil phonograph. It didn't sound like much. As a matter of fact, if you cranked it, you hardly understood what was being said. But it was very important because it broke the sound barrier. It proved that machines could ultimately emit sounds that would replicate a voice, okay? All of the machines here on the platform carried that forward. The most abundant machine was the Edison standard home phonograph that was fitted out with what they call a witch's hat horn, okay? And rather than tinfoil, what he did here was he had developed these cylinders up on the top shelf over here, which were a wax composite combination, and they would have grooves in them, like this one. Okay, this you see little grooves in, and they would slip this on the machine, put the needle on there, and you could listen to a song, or you could even record this. This is an Ediphone. This was very interesting because this they actually recorded messages. It was an early business machine. Okay.
Like a dictaphone.
Like a dictaphone, yes.
And so we go from a hand crank up there to something that's got a motor on it. It's a
Well, his first interest was in providing businesses with options. This down here is another type of phonograph that you could listen to. It had earphones. This one you could speak into. It would actually cut the cylinder, okay? So Edison's evolution of the use of sound was one of his major interests, and the big horns that you see were concert horns. They would fill, if they were up on a music stand like they are, and you put the end right on where the witch's hat horn went, it would fill this house with music. And it could be actually quite deafening. The Morning Glory horn is one of our rare pieces. It's an original piece, original paint, and just a wonderful piece from the late 1890s.
Beautiful color.
Yeah, yeah.
Calming look to it.
I've seen so many of those, and they're usually, just in terrible shape. When we saw this one, we went, wow.
So they went from a cylinder to, what did they do after that? Like
Well,
platter?
he ultimately went to flat records. He had competition, RCA being one of them. And so this was an item given to the Historical Society by a fellow by the name of Jim Dingman. This was in storage. It's in wonderful condition, but he also gave us almost 80 of these records at work on this machine. These are a
Record,
major
so you're saying record, like a photograph record
a
as opposed,
phonograph record,
as opposed to a
rather
record
than-
on my computer?
Rather than a round cylinder, these were flattened, but they still had the grooves that you needed a needle to play. So this was a major development, but it was at this point where things were changing, and basically Edison went out of the record business. But let me, do you want me to play this?
Sure.
Okay.
So this still had the hand crank, it didn't have the motor on it yet.
No motor, it's all hand crank.
So there's no wires going into this.
No,
So you could listen to this on a rainy night that the power went out.
that's right, or on a nice snowy night. So,
Great, roaring 20s or something.
yeah, well, in the 1890s, up until about 1920.
So Jack, you're talking about Edison also recording things in addition to music, and you're saying he recorded
Well, many
Native
people,
Americans?
Many people had tried to transcribe from spoken word to paper Native American languages, for instance. Edison was the first person who actually recorded the Native American tongues that were being spoken. So they were much more accurate and still exist today, okay? He went on to various films and things of that nature. He got into movie making, and of course light bulbs were a primary source of his reputation, literally worldwide. His light bulbs changed many times. The original Edison light bulbs were very expensive. The filament was platinum. Perfect timing. The original filament was platinum. Who could afford that? So he sent out to the scientific community, literally worldwide, find me a better filament. And he found in Kyoto, Japan, a type of bamboo that they split and kept splitting it finer and finer. And what you see here that looks like a drawn piece, that's actually a bamboo filament. This is a very rare, one-of-a-kind piece presented to Edison from Kyoto, Japan, where he is highly revered. He replaced the platinum filament with a bamboo one, and that didn't last all that long. And there was not a worker for Edison, but a fellow inventor, a black man actually, who came to Edison and said, "I can help you out." And what he did really helped Edison's bulbs. He put a layer of carbon on the bamboo so that the carbon burnt, the bamboo did not. And
We would like to thank Jack Clark for giving us a tour of the Sparta Historical Society's VanKirk House Museum and the Nicholson Shed. I would highly recommend going to view the Edison exhibit, which is the highest quality museum artifacts that are available on Edison, end of November 2020, as it may be moving on. And certainly stop in and see them for their fabulous collection of artifacts.